Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and welcome to your weekly astrology forecast for the week of March 2nd through March 8th. Hope that you are all doing well this week and have been getting some new messages from the depths with the Mercury Cazimi last week, kind of the rebirth of a new Mercury cycle. I'm recording this just as Venus and Pluto are separating from a square, so hopefully all of you out there are licking your wounds if you had any conflicts in your relationships or any corruption came to the surface to be dealt with. Yeah, it's a process. So hopefully you're all doing well out there. Remember that some of the things that are bubbling up from the underworld hopefully will lead to some kind of regeneration and a positive new start moving forward. So I think that's my little hope that you are all doing well, as if something difficult came up in the last week or so. See it in light of a greater process, right? This week, we have a first quarter moon where we are potentially running into another slightly material crisis where we're trying to manifest our new vision. We're, knee deep in Pisces season here. The sun has moved into the second decan of Pisces as of my recording here on Saturday, the 29th, leap day. And we are trying to bridge the gap between our idealized version of what we want to see in the world and the reality that we may be dealing with. So with that first quarter moon, we're going to be seeing a little bit of maybe a disconnect and a little bit of a challenge that requires us to put in some sort of heroic effort to bring whatever our dream is into manifestation. And we'll talk about that during our daily. On Tuesday, the 3rd, Venus is going to be squaring Saturn. This is kind of like par for the course when we've had Pluto-Saturn aspects recently. It used to be where we would hit Saturn first and then Pluto, but now whenever we have a planet that's making contact with this pair, we hit Pluto first now, and then we have to clean up the mess with our Saturnian sense of responsibility. So we'll have maybe the corruption exposed now, and then we are tasked with the responsibility of doing what is necessary to move forward. So if there was some conflicts that came up in your life with relationships or Venus stuff, or in the Aries, Capricorn houses of your chart, we will have an opportunity to deal with some of the limitations that may have been presented to us through exposing some of the seedy underbelly of what we're experiencing to the light of day. And now it's time just to get down to business and to kind of do the hard work necessary to potentially repair or let go of things. So that's Tuesday, the 3rd. Wednesday, the 4th, Mercury will retrograde back into the sign of Aquarius, back into Aquarius 3, and make its appearance as a morning star. So that's a very important phase for Mercury. It was said to be a condition of phasis, or an omen that speaks. That's something I learned from Demetra George and Robert Schmidt, where when Mercury is making its appearance from out from under the beams, that's like important messages will come to light. Mercury was hidden underneath the beams of the sun during its Cazimi and under the beams phase. And when it appears, when we're able to literally see it in the morning sky, then we can see that there may be messages that come to light that become visible again in our daily lives. So that's an important moment for paying attention to messages that you receive. That'll be Wednesday, the 4th. That same day, Venus will be sextiling Mercury retrograde, potentially getting us back in touch with a relationship that needs to, be dealt with. And then Venus will also be improving its dignity, moving into the sign of Taurus. And we'll talk about the first decan of Taurus. But, Venus gains a whole mess of dignity moving into Taurus. So that maybe will improve some things. And this is all building up to Sunday, a big day Sunday, where we see the sun conjoining Neptune, while at the same time, Venus is making a conjunction to Uranus. So we've got two very important outer planet conjunctions happening, which may be a seed moment a pretty big seed moment for bringing things into manifestation, especially with Venus moving through Taurus now. So that's a little overview for the week. New decans this week, the aforementioned Venus moving into Taurus 1, which correlates with the 5 of Pentacles. Jupiter will be moving into Capricorn 3, which we have a correspondence with the 4 of Pentacles. And then Mercury will retrograde back into Aquarius 3. And we've talked about the 7 of Swords that's associated with that decan. Essential dignities for the week. Let's take a look at our chart. So we're going to start off the week with the sun moving from 12 degrees Pisces to 19 degrees Pisces over the course of the week. The sun is said to be peregrine in the sign of Pisces. It doesn't have any really essential dignity of its own, but it will be moving through the terms of Jupiter from 12 to 16 degrees, and then the terms of Mercury from 16 to 19 degrees. Jupiter, the host of the sun this week, will be moving through the second decan of Capricorn and then ingressing into the third decan of Capricorn. Both of those positions are a position of its fall. Okay, so it's not in a domicile where it's very comfortable. So we have to watch out for Jupiter being given resources that it's not necessarily used to using to bring about its most essential nature, which is expansion, abundance, growth, integrity. So we got to watch out for those things. Jupiter is going to be moving through the terms of Venus from 14 to 22 degrees. And then the aforementioned Saturn is still going into, still moving through the third decan of Capricorn, where it's moving through its 28th degree here. Before, Jupiter is moving from 19 to 20 degrees. But Saturn will still be in the terms of Mars this week. So remember, terms were like a curriculum that was being set by like a stern or a lenient middle school teacher. If the domicile ruler was the principal of the school, providing the resources for the teacher, the term ruler was like the actual teacher in the classroom setting the course of action. So we've got a malefic as our term ruler for another malefic. So that could be a little bit challenging. If I'm expanding that metaphor out more, maybe the superintendent of the district is the exaltation ruler. Last week I talked about exaltation rulers potentially being like the owner of a restaurant and the general manager of the restaurant being the domicile ruler. So that's an interesting, set of metaphors to keep playing with if you work with essential dignities. I think we're all just still trying to figure out how this all works. But it is nice to kind of play with it a little bit and see how that works. I like thinking of these. I like thinking metaphorically with these things and thinking of them as actual people and actual grounded manifestations. I think that'll help you in your astrological practice in general, is thinking of these planets as characters in a drama, and what roles are they playing? They are acting out some sort of well, if you're a determinist, some sort of script, and doesn't mean that they can't improvise a little bit within the script. I think that's the gift of a really great actor, is even though they've been given some words, they can adjust a few words here and there, and they may be able to bring a different energy to that particular role. But yeah, if we think about it in terms of actors playing out a role within a certain setting, that can be really enlightening as far as our astrological practices go. It makes all these ambiguities or all these abstractions very concrete. Okay, Venus this week is moving through the last degrees of Aries and then moving into its domicile in Taurus. So let's just to give you a little recap on this Venus and Aries. I've been seeing this around, especially with this square to Pluto. So Venus in Aries 3 is in its exile, but also has rulership by face, or it's a decanic rulership. And so you can think of the planets as putting on 3 different masks over the course of their journey through a particular sign. And when a planet is putting on its own mask, it has some more power. It has some more ability to kind of play a role that isn't more suited to it, even if it may be in its exile. So I've been seeing this week with Venus in Aries 3. We talked last week about Venus in Aries 3 being about charisma, the ability to like garner a following through just burning very brightly. And, you know, Venus is being provided resources by Mars. So it's this very, could this be this very aggressive, like kind of, you know, really direct sexuality or attractiveness. And some people sent me some examples of this. One being Marilyn Monroe, which I thought was really interesting. She has Venus in the third decan of Aries, and you know, right on her ascendant. I'm sorry, right on her midheaven. And yes, very visible sexuality, very exaggerated sexuality. And I posted a few Instagram stories. I've been kind of playing around with my Instagram stories lately, trying to just do some creative things. It's just kind of fun. I was getting really inspired the day that one particular day with Venus conjoining with the moon kind of bringing things into being. And I was getting really into some music. I was doing my notes to classical music and getting into some really epic like soundtracks, like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and The Lord of the Rings, just these very epic orchestral pieces that were making me feel like very like, yes, I'm doing the work of the universe here. And it was just, it was charging me up. And I posted some of this on my Instagram stories and made some memes. And the next day when Venus was making its application to Pluto, I posted kind of these more archetypal figures that I thought were associated with Venus in Aries 3. One of them were, if Venus in Aries 3 were a animated character. And then I thought about Jessica Rabbit and her very overt sexuality, and Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, where just these very exaggerated, aggressively sexual type of figures that are very charismatic and burn very brightly and are almost, I know that we can think of Jessica Rabbit as being extraordinarily feminine, but there's almost a masculine quality to it, right? Like kind of just a very like overt quality to the sexuality. And I thought that was really interesting. And I've been seeing this in social media too, just people who normally would be a little bit more reserved, just kind of coming out and like being very overt with their Venusian nature. Yeah, it's very spicy. So we're going to be moving out of that energy this week and into a little bit calmer, more patient, more receptive Venus, where this next Venus isn't going to be, you know, I don't know, flashing their goods everywhere as much as Venus in Aries 3, but more about just, you know, radiating her phosphorescent essence, right? Venus emerged from the ocean like a glowing jellyfish, and she didn't really need to put it out there, so to speak. She just glowed with her eternal, essential nature, and then was adorned with all the good things in life, like beautiful clothes and jewelry and things like that. So we're going to get more into a more receptive Venus, which is more where she functions a little bit more comfortably in that position than she has in Aries. Not saying it's bad in Aries, but it may lead to some challenges that we didn't expect if we are a little bit too aggressive with our desire nature and with our you know, flaunting our powers of attraction. And that may have gotten us into some trouble potentially with the contact with Pluto. Like things were bubbling up from the depths. Pluto is in a very, I would say, conservative sign of Capricorn, very, very buttoned up. And if you're trying to garner a following and it comes into contact with the Lord of the underworld in a very structured sign, and then this week coming into contact with Saturn, potentially repercussions for being a little bit too saucy. So just keep your eye out for that. Venus in Taurus 1 is going to have dignity by domicile. It is the triplicity ruler of the earth signs by day. It will be moving through its own terms from 0 to 8 degrees. So very powerful Venus, very powerful manifestation, powers of attraction that are, I would say, just much quieter than we've been experiencing with Venus in Aries. But like I said, more functional. Mars is going to be moving through the first 10 degrees, I'm sorry, the second 10 degrees of Capricorn, 10 to 14 degrees this week, where it is in its exaltation. It also has rulership by face. So Mars is putting on its own mask through the second decan of Capricorn, doing Mars things. It is in the terms of Jupiter from 7 to 14 degrees. This is a very powerful Mars for getting stuff done, for strategic planning. This decan was associated with the 3 of Pentacles, where we see 3 figures looking at a blueprint for building some ornate structure. So great time to really have some strategic thinking, especially as we're diving into our spirit and into our imagination this week, as the sun makes contact with Neptune in a conjunction. We're doing a real deep dive into what we really want and what we were trying to visualize and bring into manifestation. And Mars is part of that story. Mars is making a sextile to the sun by whole sign and to Neptune. So there is an ability to take action on the spiritual truths that we see. Now, it may not be perfect. That is part of the acceptance that we have to have through this second journey of the sun through the second decan of Pisces. But we still may be, there is some support for bringing things down to earth, right? Mars in this Capricorn ruled area is very earthy and wants to take tangible action on the dream. Okay, Mercury still is funky. Funky Mercury. Mercury is going to start off still in its exile, still retrograde, also in its fall, because Mercury has the dual abilities of exile and fall in the sign of Pisces, due to its ability to contain both types of opposites. One of the opposition of the sun to Saturn type of opposition, where we kind of have a stalemate, and the other, the opposite of the moon, and associated with exaltations and falls, with bringing things into being and passing out, where we have a little bit of its opposite in the other sign, and the seed is planted and they kind of flow within each other, like the moon does as it waxes and wanes. Mercury will be moving through the terms of Venus from 0 to 12 degrees Pisces, as it starts its journey at 1 degrees Pisces, and then retrogrades back to 28 degrees of Aquarius, where it will gain triplicity. It is the nighttime triplicity ruler of the air signs. So there will be some more communal support for some of our communications when Mercury retrogrades back into Aquarius. It gives us a little bit of objectivity, which we've sorely needed, because our messages have become mixed and all sort of jumbled, and all sorts of emotions and dreams and wishes and hopes and illusions. And this may be a little moment of clarity when Mercury retrogrades back into Aquarius on Wednesday the 4th. It will retrograde back into the terms of Saturn, so there will be maybe some hard truths that we have to come to terms with before we can move forward again. That retrograde Mercury is going to make contact with Venus, though. So there's something that may be needed, some communications that need to happen within our relationships, probably due to some of the cathartic energies that came up with the Pluto Venus square, some of the corruption that we may have needed to deal with. And there may be some fruitful conversations that we have in the middle of the week that could be supportive to moving forward again. All right, the moon this week is waxing. It is waxing, starting off in the first quarter phase, where it is squared to the sun, so roughly 90 degrees away from the sun. The moon will start off in Gemini, where it is peregrine. That Gemini moon may be a little sticky in the beginning of the week, because it's being hosted in the sign of Gemini by a retrograde Mercury, and it is squared to its host. So Communication may still be challenging at the beginning of the week. The moon will move into Cancer, where it has rulership by domicile and then is wearing its own mask in the third decan. And then the moon will become peregrine in the sign of Leo, and then gain a little bit of dignity by being the triplicity ruler of the earth signs by the nighttime in the sign of Virgo. So it'll be waxing from its first quarter almost to the full moon. So the full moon is going to happen on Monday the 9th. So that is where we have a building phase, and we have a refining phase before whatever we've been working on comes out into the light at the full moon and takes on some physical manifestation. So this is a really great week for figuring out any challenges at the first quarter moon and starting to refine the expression of your dream through working through some things that may not be working. Anytime we start a new venture, there's always some hiccups and bumps along the road. Anytime we're trying to manifest a new dream, the very nature of a dream is that it may not be able to be manifested in its perfection in the world of material reality and form. And that can be frustrating. And that's probably some of what we're going to be experiencing this week, is the disconnect between our idealized version of what we want to create and what is actually possible in physical reality. And it doesn't mean that physical reality is bad. It doesn't mean that I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but I think that I don't believe that this kind of like we have unlimited ability to just quote unquote create our own reality. I think that there is some of that. We can create some of our reality. I think that there are natural laws that we are working within, things like time, things like limitation of resources, things like inequality of form. Like everything is not necessarily equal in the physical world. It is a spiritual ideal that we are trying to manifest. But in reality, we have to come to terms with, I don't know. I had to come to terms with not being 7 feet tall when I wanted to be a professional basketball player. It's just the reality of the situation. Doesn't mean that I might not have been able to manifest something like that had I really put my mind to it. But as hard as I try, I might not be able to grow an extra 1.5 feet. And those are just realities that we have to come to terms with. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. It's just part of being incarnated in a physical body as a unique spirit or soul that is a manifestation or some sort of copy of a divine ideal. Remember, we talked last week about the first and second decan of Pisces, where there was a craftsman that was creating a beautiful statue, and I don't remember the name off the top of my head. And his apprentice, he had to leave to go do something, and his apprentice tried to make a copy of it and ran out of clay. And the one that became finished by the master became truth, and the one that was unfinished, the master was so moved by it, he fired it anyway in the kiln, and that became falsehood. And so it's a parable about the imperfection that happens with material form. And I think if we come to terms with that and don't resist it and don't get too bent out of shape about it, our lives are going to be a little bit easier, right? This is something where instead of getting, this is one thing I disagree with the New Age movement, is we try to not come to terms with some of the limitations that we have in life. And I was guilty of this in the past. This may be just the folly of youth on some level too, where we think that we are immortal, right? And we think that we're going to live forever and we can do whatever we want and we're indestructible and things like that. And as we age, we maybe come to terms with some of those limitations. And I don't necessarily think that has to be bad. I think if we come to terms with some mature limitations and work within what we have, I think we're going to be able to build better. That doesn't mean that we should narrowly put ourselves in a box and just like get down about the reality of our situation. There are definitely times where we have to bust out and go beyond what we previously thought was possible. So that it's both, right? But I think a little bit of grace when it comes to that is important. And that's been one of my transformations as from a youth to a middle age, is kind of coming to terms with some of the rules of physical incarnation, and not resisting them and not feeling so depressed about it, but working within them and creating what I can create within some of the responsibilities that I may have as well. And that may be true for some of you out there as well. I mean, don't let people pour cold water on your dreams, but it does help to be a little bit realistic about the dream sometimes too. And that's some of I think that's part of the theme of our week this week. All right, let's go into our daily exploration. Daily exploration. Monday the 2nd. Let's go through it here. Get the sun on the ascendant. There we go. Monday, March 2nd, is the square between the sun and the moon. And you can see that here, roughly 12 degrees. It'll be exact at around 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a position in the second decan of Gemini. Let me just move it forward so we can kind of see when it's happening here. You can get a visual. It's always nice to get a visual. There's our visual. Okay, for those of you just listening in though, we've got the sun at 12 degrees Pisces and the moon at Gemini, at 12 degrees Gemini. And they are roughly 90 degrees apart, which is forming a figure or a shape called a square. Okay, because if we connected the signs all in the 4 signs like this, they would form this shape of a square. So that's also called a tetragon. Okay, 4-sided. All right, and when we have a 4-sided shape or a tetragon or a square, that is of the nature of Mars, due to the position of Mars in relationship to the sun and the moon in the Thema Mundi, which was called the natal chart of the world. So there was this kind of rationale in ancient authors that different aspects had planetary natures, and in this case, the nature of Mars. And I've been doing some deep diving into the natures of the planets lately, and just to kind of get a refresher, and really maybe get some more a depth of understanding on what the planets are actually trying to do. And in my exploration of Mars, Mars likes to cut things short. It cuts things off. It has a separation quality. It's impatient of delay. It doesn't have the same staying power as Saturn does. It's like a short distance sprinter, short bursts of speed. And we could see some kind of like challenge or friction, conflict, or a need to exert our will to resolve something. Maybe through a sense of discomfort that we have to exert our will to maybe sever something that isn't working. So as I was talking about in the beginning of this video, this may be a point in time where we've been gestating, right? This Pisces area of our life with this deep dive and this Mercury retrograde. We've been going deep into our souls and our hearts and our imaginations to try to figure out what is the next step? What is giving us hope? What is the why of what we're doing, you know? And then we get to this first quarter moon here, and there may be some sort of conflict. And the second decan of Gemini was represented by the 9 of Swords. And this was like kind of coming to terms with duality, maybe too many options. This is where we see a figure that has his head in his hands, potentially due to like some kind of nightmare that he's experiencing. I know for me personally, when the moon's in Gemini, it's hard for me to sleep because my brain is just going a million miles an hour, and it's hard to shut off the internal narrative, because it's working through all these different possibilities. And this may be what we're experiencing too, is just too many possibilities. And what we have to do is sort of uh, choose something. And we can't choose everything. This is another thing that I've been learning about the nature of Gemini. Is we are seeing all of the possibilities in the beginning, and as we move through these decans, eventually in the third decan of Gemini, Austin Coppock calls it the executioner's sword. One of the twins has to die. Some of the options have to be let go of for the other ones to live. And this may be true with some of the choices in your life too. This is probably the bane of every person who has prominent Gemini placements, is they want to do everything. But if they spread their energy too thin, uh, they're not going to do anything well. So this is where we get kind of the jack of all trades, master of none type of energy. And I remember Austin Coppock telling a story, I think on a podcast, maybe it was Chris Brennan's podcast, where his mother told him that he has a Gemini moon. His mom told him, hey, he had this experience. He wanted to do all the things, right? His mom said, you don't have to not do multiple things, but you can't necessarily do them all at the same time. Choose one thing, do it, and then if you move on to the next thing. And that may be the best advice I could give you for this first quarter square is, you don't have to let go of every possibility indefinitely, but you may have to choose one thing to really focus to bring into being, and let go of some of the other distractions that are limiting the efficacy of what you are trying to manifest right in the here and now. So prioritize. Pick the thing that is most important to you now, and write it out. Make a list and say, you know what, this is actually what is important to me right now. I'm going to put my energy towards that. This is actually pulling me off course. I'm going to table that. I'm going to put that on the back burner, and I may revisit it later, but right now, this is what is most important to me. I think if you can do that, you're going to be happier with what you bring into being and what you manifest. Because a little manifestation advice, we can build on our successes. If we realize that we can bring something into form, we get a little confidence boost with that, right? And if we take the time to bring a small part of something into being first, that gives us the energy to keep going. If we try to bring the whole thing into being all at once, that's a problem. I talk about this in my guitar classes. I teach adult guitar classes, which is sometimes a challenging emotional experience for my students, because many of them are very good at what they do. I live in the Ann Arbor, Michigan area, and we're very close to the University of Michigan, which is a very, very there's a lot of people here who are very high functioning. A lot of them are very best at what they do, and they get really humbled when they come into this guitar class, because they all of a sudden are thrust into a position where they have to have a beginner mind again. And what I do in my classes is I really teach fundamentals. I teach very slowly, very patiently, and I want to make sure that they are mastering each stage of the journey before we move on to things that are more complex. And the first thing I talk about in the class, and that helps, I think, open their minds to this and not beat themselves up so much, is I talk about the gap between our creativity, our taste, the gap between our taste and our ability level. And this may be something that we're experiencing with this first quarter moon too, is there's a gap between our ideals, our taste, quote unquote, and our ability to bring that into manifestation. And we just get closer to the ideal by doing small, practical, tangible steps along the way and building a foundation. If you try to build too much too soon, the whole structure will collapse. You have to put the foundation in first. And that's really what Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and Mars, all of these things in Capricorn are asking us to do. You don't build a great pyramid with a point at the bottom. You have to build this wide structure and build it towards the peak at the top, right? And we have to lay that foundation first. So I think that that will be the way to get closer to your dream, is to lay the foundation, being comfortable with more humble achievements at first, and that will lead you to greater and greater things as you keep building whatever it is that you're trying to build. Okay, whatever Tower of Babel you're trying to build towards your dream. You have to be careful of that too. You know, a little humility goes a long way in these times, I think. Okay, so Tuesday, the 3rd. I think that's a pretty good explanation or exploration of our first quarter moon. Remember, Mercury is going to be providing. Sounds so snide. Mercury is going to be providing for the moon. So there may be a little bit of confusion that happens because we are trying to bring something to light from a point of depth, and Mercury is not moving in its through a place where it has objectivity. The point, though, is that you may wait a couple days, and then Mercury is going to be in a place of more objective place that's going to help you to get clearer on what you want to do. All right. Let's go forward. Let's move forward. March 3rd, Tuesday, the day of Mars. On this Mars day, a couple things are happening. Couple non-lunar things. Well, first, the moon is going to be moving through the 3rd decan of Gemini. So again, this may be where we are eliminating some of the options that we had so that we can put our energy into what really needs to happen. The moon's going to be squaring Neptune at 1:24 a.m. So this may be where we come to face with the illusion that we may have about what we're trying to do. We may lose a little bit of steam. We may just want to, instead of dealing with a choice that we have to make, we may just want to escape a little bit. This is the danger of when we have contacts with Neptune, is escapism. Generally, the escapism is a desire to merge with the divine and transcend this daily life that we're this semi-charmed kind of life. So for all of you 90s kids out there who know about that song, try not to go do some crystal meth, okay? Like it's not going to leave you in a great place. For context, that song, Third Eye Blind, Semi-Charmed Kind of Life, apparently is about meth, which I didn't know when it came out, but have since learned. And the lead singer had some struggles with addiction, and I'm sure that I think that's a great Neptunian song. Like, he's dealing with the disappointment in bringing things into manifestation from his dream, and all he wants to do is just go merge with the divine, and the only thing he's found that can bring him closer to that ideal is drugs. And my personal thought on that is that I don't know, there's repercussions to that. I think that the way that I deal with this more is through meditation, through art, through prayer. I've found that anytime that I really haven't had a lot of experience with drugs, but I did have an experience in high school where I overdid it with alcohol and ended up in the hospital. And that really defined my experience of like substances to escape reality. And it showed me that there were severe repercussions for that. And I find that some of these other things, they can be traps too. We can meditate all day and not pay our bills. It's a balance, right? But my personal thought is that what I have found is if we use things like substances to escape reality and try to merge with the divine, eventually there will be a connection with reality, and it will make reality much harder. I think that it's like if we're trying to escape, when we come back down to earth, reality isn't just going to go away. And when we come back down and we come back, our feet reach the ground again, our neglect of maintenance of physical reality could make it even more difficult to deal with the things that we need to deal with. And I know that it's hard sometimes. And if you struggle with addiction out there, I sympathize with you. And I know it can be a hard thing. We all have different things that we use to escape from the world. And I think that those themes of escapism are going to be really strong with the sun conjoining with Neptune this week. And I encourage you to try to be balanced. And I think that there are certain things that may be healthier ways to connect than others. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what those are. And that may be part of your homework this week, is find out what are healthy ways to connect with the divine, and realize when we are just, escaping rather than trying to deal with stuff. I think that some of the most spiritual things that you can do, and here's where the real turnaround is to face what is real and what is asking you to be faced, the necessity of your life. Chop wood and carry water was a phrase that the monks would use in, I think, the Buddhist culture. And that, means that, to really get in touch with spiritual life, you got to do the physical things. You got to take care of your responsibilities. And sometimes that can be the most spiritual action, is paying attention to the details of your life and truly engaging with love with the mundane, right? That's something that's been a real deep lesson for me, is performing service with devotion. Okay. All right. So that may be our contact with Neptune. At 7 a.m., Jupiter will be moving into the second decan of Capricorn. So this is a shift in our Jupiterian jovial energy. So it is Jupiter is moving into Capricorn. Oops. 2. So as we've discussed in previous podcasts about Jupiter, about the sun moving through this decan, this is a solar decan. So it heads the mask of the sun. Okay. So our 3 decans, we start off with a Jupiter mask in Capricorn 1, then we move into a Mars mask in the second decan, and now we are having Jupiter take on almost a role of a sun, a solar role. And you could say it creates a narrative. You have a vision in the first decan of Capricorn. You're trying to figure out where you want to expand or grow your empire. You take action on that in the second decan, and then you have to play the role of administrator or some sort of authority figure in the third decan of Capricorn. And with Jupiter moving there, as I've done my deep dive of the planets through Austin Coppock's work, through traditional authors like Rhetorius and Paulus and Manilius and Ptolemy, and all of these dudes have been going back and reading Ben Dyke's work. Jupiter is my summary of Jupiter, I think, is I feel like this is what is coming naturally to us and is almost being gifted to us. It is, Jupiter was like the wind in your sails. And we see this with triplicity rulership being of the nature of Jupiter, is we have communal support. We have universal, like if we're in the ship of our life, we're getting this fortuitous gust of wind that's blowing us closer to our destination. And I think that what we might experience with Jupiter moving through Capricorn 3 is there is the potential to be gifted positions of authority, of power, of responsibility through favors of those in authority. That maybe we may have a little bit more ease with relating to authority figures with Jupiter moving through this third Capricorn decan. Now, that being said, there is an elephant in the room with this. Jupiter is starting to meet up with Pluto. Okay. He's hurtling towards his conjunction with Pluto, which happens on the 4th of April of this year. And we will see we're going to see this kind of, this may be where we are trying to take positions of authority based on our very base needs. If we combine Pluto with Jupiter here, we're expanding, but we're expanding through the id, I guess, if you want to get psychological about it. We're expanding. We have a deep psychological drive or will to power that that TAURUS talks about with Pluto. This kind of this really volcanic underworld Hades power trip, right? And with Jupiter coming in contact with Pluto, that's going to expand that desire to be an authority figure in our lives. And we have to be real careful about that, because Jupiter is in its fall. And this is where we talk about the hubris. This could be a real expansion of like, holy cow, we are really trying to go for a power grab here, or people around us or people in society are going for a power grab. So keep an eye on that first week of April, and really keep yourself in check. I think if you are feeling just the surge of like ambition that is coming from a very deep place, and it may be coming from a place of fear, because this is being provided for by Saturn, which I think is this kind of deep-seated fears that we may have due to lack. So I think that if I'm to really, parse this out, we may have a drive for authority that is really supercharged by its contact with Pluto, that is due to fearing or not feeling powerful. And that's when it becomes really dangerous, when we're trying to compensate for something that we feel that we lack. So just be very careful with this Jupiter. And if you're gifted a position of authority, check the fine print and try not to get too drunk, Sun contacting with Neptune, with your own authoritative presence. And just keep an eye out on the collective for that too. Okay. Excessive ambition. When I was doing my little Instagram story dance, I was feeling very, very like, I don't know, creative with that. I had Darth Vader's theme came on as I was showing the notes that I made for the forecast here, and I was zooming in on the Pluto Jupiter conjunction as it was dun 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 dun. And it seems so appropriate for Jupiter conjoining Pluto in Capricorn. That's Darth Vader, man. That's Darth Vader energy. He wants to rule the universe from this deep place of fear, and and that's the whole point of the dark side there, is give in to your fear, and that will give you power, right? And I think that's something that we really have to keep abreast of as we move forward through this. Is you could be very seduced by the dark side coming up, and you could be expanded through submitting and surrendering to your anger and your fear and your urge to dominate others. Yeah, I've been coming face to face with this myself, just with some old things coming up with some work that I had done, and feeling I had some feelings of being disrespected and things like that, and I've had to come face to face with it, with my ego, and say, what is really at stake here? Not a whole lot. And trying to let go of that and release a grip on having to be in control of something has been in really enlightening for me. And I reached out had some good advice from one of my teachers, and it was, and I'm sure it's still going to be a process moving forward, but maybe that's happening in your own life too. And just keep an eye on it. Keep checking in with yourself. Check in with your friends too. That was one of the things I really realized as I felt myself going deeper into the Darth Vader hole. We should coin that phrase. Was check in with people in your life, because they may not have as emotional of an attachment to, or an ego attachment to it that you do. And just personally, I have Leo ascendant, so feelings of disrespect and pride, that's where my trigger is. And if I feel like I haven't gotten credit for something, oh my God, that'll bring up all the Pluto garbage, right? That really needs to be dealt with. And you start to realize that, wow, that's just a manifestation of ego. And if I can just come back to the place of service, really, right? service, you come back to a place of service. Like, everything isn't about you. And I think this is the thing that you'll start to see in your life if you really are self-examining and being honest with yourself, is that a lot of the anger issues and a lot of the deep-seated junk that feeds our fear and our I don't know, discontent, is just manifestation of pride or ego or things like that. And a good song to listen to is the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, one of my favorite albums of all time. They have this song at the end, like, hang on to your ego, basically saying let go of your ego, and all the follies of that. So go, maybe I'll put a link to it in the video, or just go check it out. It's on Pet Sounds. It's a great album to listen to. Brian Wilson's a genius. And I don't know, for me lately, I've been getting back in touch with really listening to a lot of music with, all this Piscean deep dive stuff. And it really is healing. One of the things I wanted to talk about with Venus a little bit too, which is a nice, I think, segue to the next aspect of our day, which is Venus square Saturn. Okay, we'll get there. It's roundabout. So you can see here in my chart, if you're following along on video, that Venus will be at 28 degrees of Aries and Saturn is at 28 degrees of Capricorn, making a square. Again, some sort of conflict, right? The nature of Mars. Okay. So in my exploration of traditional meanings of the planets, of the way that the people in Greek society thought of their roles, Venus had some very interesting things. Venus, here, I'm going to just read some of the notes that I wrote down as I was listening to a few lectures and reading some things. Venus was responsible for the education of children, for theatrical office. This is what I thought was really interesting. The regulation of Greek theater, the maintenance or the maintaining of the purity of the dramas, and the drama's purpose. So Greek theater, it played a big role in Greek culture, ancient Greek culture. And from some of the lectures I've been listening to, the purpose of that theater was to serve as a catharsis, or the purification of strong emotions. Venus had a role as a purifier. It was concerned with cleanliness, rites of purgation, purification or cleansing of something or someone. So I thought that was really interesting, because I feel like music is one of the ultimate cathartic experiences. We have all these strong emotions, and music taps into it and allows us to release it, just like theater does, just like drama does. Art in general is a cathartic purge of all the deep emotions. I thought that was brilliant for Venus. That's such a brilliant expression of understanding the true nature of Venus. Is really, we can think about this as we've given a lot of this meaning over to Pluto. But I thought that was kind of interesting, that they maybe have some real things in common, Venus and Pluto, being associated with purity and regeneration and catharsis from the depths. Okay. Now, Venus is going to be making contact with Saturn after she has made her square to Pluto. So what do we make of this? Now, I've been talking about the seed moments of these outer planet contacts, and the seed moment for the Venus-Pluto one was, I believe, the beginning of December. It was like December 13th or something. And then for the seed moment for Venus conjunct Saturn was the 11th of December. So look back at the 11th of December, see if there's anything going on around 19 degrees of Capricorn in your chart. And now you'll see some sort of build first quarter experience, like a first quarter moon, where we have some tangible crisis that we need to deal with that is about Saturn Venus themes. Now, another thing that was interesting in my deep dive of the planets, Saturn has some really unexpected significations as well. I've been really thinking about Saturn as Schmidt says that Saturn is exclusion, rejection, But he also says that Saturn is associated with histrionics. Saturn is the liar. Okay, like, so thus Saturn is associated with actors because really what an actor is doing is an elaborate lie, basically. So he asserts that Saturn rules the theater, but uh, Venus was responsible for the purity of the drama, right? Maybe like the writer of the drama, or the playwright, so to speak. Okay, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So we're going to be seeing the Actors Guild, right? The actor Saturn coming into contact with the the um the playwright, right? And this could be also, though Saturn is like what we fear, what we reject, is the concept of boundaries, walls, limitations, entropy, time, and, you know, more modern significations of Venus are relationships. So we also might see some sort of limitation coming into play in our relationships as we try to purge some deeper Aryan part of ourself, right? Some Mars ruled part of ourself. Okay. We're trying to cleanse the inner self with this Aries stuff. We're trying to cleanse our identity, I think, with this, Venus moving through the second or the third decan of Aries. And it's coming into contact with just the structures of our life, being able to administrate third decan Capricorn parts of our life, like just the structures of our life. So we've brought up some of the corruption with Venus squaring Pluto. And now we are going to have to restructure and come to terms with the reality of that new realization. And that may be painful too. Remember, before, the order was reversed. We came to terms with the limitations, and that sparked really deep, cathartic, underworld feelings. Now, the crap is going to bubble up from the sewer, and then we just have to kind of clean it up. This is the cleanup phase of things. Okay, so if something in your relationship came to light, or some part of you that is affecting relationships, right? Because Aries is a very individualistic sign. Okay, it's very about crafting separate identity. That's why Venus is in her exile in this particular area of the zodiac, because she has this separateness. She's glorifying the self. So there may have been something that bubbled up that was a problem that you have that may be making your relationships challenging, that needs to be dealt with. Okay, and you got to own it. Okay, you got to own it. Sometimes when we like to point fingers, and what we need to do is own some of the things, some of our flaws, and it's okay. It's all right if you have a flaw. I think that the difficulty with this position is and the difficulty for Venus and Aries in general, and I've experienced this myself here, is where consensus and cooperation is necessary. There is maybe a strong individualistic drive, and that's when we can get ourselves into trouble, when we need to communicate, when we need to work together to bring about something, and we choose to take action, maybe even secretly, on our own. That can create the conflict, that can create the tension. And we may have to be coming to terms with some of those behaviors in our relationships as we move forward to the Saturn square, because some of those behaviors may have been self-defeating and leading to a sense of lack. And now it's time to clean up the mess. That's what Venus squared Saturn is. Maybe letting go of our individualistic drive and getting back to the moment of cooperation and harmony. And that's going to be really powerful as we see Venus moving towards her conjunction with Uranus, because that's, Venus is going to be much more inclined to cooperate with others in that position in a very innovative way. Whatever was brought up over the course of the last week or two, now we have to make a new start to really deal with whatever was brought up. And we have to, when we can't do things the same way we did before. This is a moment of, this is a Promethean moment. Uranus was associated by TAURUS with Prometheus, a gift, the fire bringer, giving a gift to humanity. And we have to be willing to shatter our old misconceptions about how we deal, particularly with resources, with the first decan of Taurus, and how we build things, and the fertile ground that we are planting our seeds within, and how we plan and how we manage resources and all of that. So sometimes the corruption has to be brought up, dealt with, and then we can make the new start. So remember, this is all part of a greater narrative. And in a story, like in a great drama, in a great Greek tragedy or Greek comedy, whatever you want to think about it, it would be completely boring if there wasn't some periods of conflict. I mean, a good story has an arc to it, right? And learn to love the conflicts, because the conflicts are what shows you the solution. You know, I think that's really the Taoist way of thinking about it, is sometimes you got to lean into the conflict so that you know what the appropriate reaction is. That's the yin and the yang. You get a picture of the little dark seed so that you know how to grow the light, and vice versa. So just embrace those moments, embrace those things. Okay, so as I was saying, the seed of that Venus Saturn conjunction was the 11th of December, slightly earlier than the conjunction of Venus and Pluto, because remember, they used to be switched in their positions. So yeah, just to sum up that aspect, take responsibility in your relationships. You may be feeling the weight of some duties or burdens or necessities that you have to do due to the quality of Saturn here. This is all the stuff that we don't want to do, that's hard, that isn't romantic. This is not a romantic aspect. This is an aspect where, like, say you're in a relationship and you're like, all right, we've done some things with the budget, and now we need to get back on track. We need to cut this out, do that. We need to kind of take this different action and all these things. It's like the tough conversations that you have that ultimately will lead to a stronger foundation of union between the two of you, and hopefully a greater trust between one another. So I think that if you look at it that way, instead of like this big argument type of thing, I think that'll lead you to a better manifestation. All right, moving through the end of Tuesday, the moon is going to sextile Venus, at 9:19 p.m., lending some assistance, okay, some communicative assistance from the moon, and making a contact with Venus before she's changing signs. Then the moon moves into Cancer, where she gains a lot of dignity at 11:25 p.m. One little side note about the moon I thought was interesting. I've been listening to a lecture on fixed stars by Austin Coppock. He was a guest at Nightlight Astrology a while back, and I've been listening to this lecture. And he talked about the moon. I thought he was very eloquent about this. He talked about the moon as a circling, orbiting membrane that decides what gets in and what can feed or nurture us. It's a transmitter of starlight. So he talked about the fixed stars as being like generators, like our own sun, right? Sources of vitality that the planets tap into, like a root system. So like we're rooted to those fixed stars, and they are feeding those planets. So if you have a planet that's on a fixed star, it's like absorbing the energy of that fixed star. And the moon is kind of like this like thing that's absorbing. It's the best sponge that we've got, but it's also deciding what gets in and what doesn't. So think about that with the moon, and when the moon makes contacts with things, it's kind of an interesting little shift of the perspective I had of the moon being a trigger for the music box. It's similar, but it's just a slightly different way of thinking about it that I thought was very interesting. Okay, let's move forward to Wednesday. Wednesday, March 4th. Around 6:00 a.m., we're going to see Mercury retrograde back into the sign of Aquarius. Okay. So here we go. Hallelujah. Like, and also around, not exactly at that time, but around 4 p.m., Mercury is going to emerge from under the beams. So I want you to really pay close attention to any messages or ideas that you have around 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the day of Mercury, March 4th. All right. So this improves Mercury's condition, I would say, moving back into the third decan of Aquarius. It has some triplicity dignity, some communal support. It is instead of going underwater, it's like the flying fish, right? Like I've used that image for Mercury in Pisces, the flying fish. So imagine you have the ocean here, and we've got Mercury in Pisces down here, flying. He's the fish. Bloop, 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 right? And eventually he makes a jump out of the water very briefly. Mercury. Okay. Yay, he's flying. You think of this moment above the water as Mercury in Aquarius, because he can see everything. He's trying to escape the predator, right? That's usually what's happening, is there's some sort of, shark energy here trying to get Mercury. And Mercury is like, woo, I'm jumping out of the water and I can see where I'm going next. Okay. So this is our moment of escaping the water and seeing things from a higher perspective, so that when we come back down, because we're going to go back through Pisces again when Mercury moves direct, we'll be able to kind of fix some of the things that maybe weren't going so smoothly before. So it'll be a welcomed moment of objectivity. And this omen that speaks, really, this Mercury emerging from under the beams, happens at 15 degrees of separation from Mercury to the sun. Remember, in Mercury's Cazimi moment, it was exactly conjunct the sun. And now it is emerging, okay, from its by retrograde motion. And what that means is that the sun, when the sun rises, generally when Mercury was under the beams, we could literally not see it in the sky because the sun's beams were making it invisible. And this has metaphorical and oracular meanings as well. And when Mercury emerges from under the beams, we can literally see it rising before the sun, and it emerges as the morning star. So a little bit more of an active Mercury. He's out from under the underworld here. He's bringing us messages, okay? And so pay close attention to the messages that you receive. Now, one interesting thing, I just side note, this is totally like probably not that important, but as I was reading Retorius, he uses a lot of aspects that are much smaller for being under the beams, like 10 degrees for a lot of planets instead of 15 degrees. And I'm curious if any of you out there have had any experience with that, or if that's just something from antiquity that we've learned is not correct. But I thought that was interesting. There was a smaller orb for being under the beams, according to Retorius, who was I believe, a 7th century writer. Yeah, I believe that is the time period he was in, either 7th or 9th century, something like that, around that period of time, one of the early astrological writers. Anyway, okay, so remember, as Mercury is retrograding back into third decan of Aquarius, third decan of Aquarius was that card that we saw with the man carrying a bunch of swords, escaping from the camp. I think of this moment as maybe there's something we left behind that we need to go back for, and some piece of knowledge, some realization that we're going back, that some moment of clarity, so that we can move forward with our dream again. This is where we get that little moment of clarity, and we're like, oh, that's something that I should bring with me. I'm trying to leave this other thing behind, but maybe I need to make a realization first before I am, moving forward with all of this. All right. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to clear my drawings here. Oh, check. Sorry, I bumped something. Hopefully the audio is okay here. Hope and pray that Mercury will be nice to me. All right. So the moon is also going to be sextiling Uranus at 6:25 a.m. And you can see that here when it's in Cancer. It's going to be making this sextile. It's going to be letting in some Uranian light, supporting the new changes that we want to make. That'll be important as we move forward. There we go. Sorry. The other non-lunar aspect of the day is Venus is going to be making a sextile to that retrograde Mercury. So that piggybacks off of what we were saying. There's something that we need to get in touch with. Okay, the sextile. I think, this is a moment of learning something about ourselves, learning something about what we really want, what we really desire, who we want to be, questions of identity. I think this is going to be important before we move forward into the next phase of our journey. I compared this to an ex. If we extrapolate this out to Venus, some ex lover coming back into our life or coming back for something that they left behind at the old apartment. Maybe you left some very valuable heirloom that is sacred to you at an ex's apartment, and you're going back, and finally you and the ex have moved forward, and you're objective enough to go back and allow yourself to retrieve it without some sort of huge conflict. This being of the nature of the sextile, it's harmonious. I would say the danger of this may literally manifest if you do get back in touch with an ex. Just be careful that you're not re-engaging with something that you've found that isn't really serving you anymore. Try not to be impulsive with this Venus and Aries, because that could get you into some trouble. But yeah, what did you learn from it? What have you learned about yourself? What kind of cathartic things have you, what deep emotions have you been dealing with and cleansing with this Venus moving through Aries? And how do you move forward to the next phase of your journey? All right, the last aspect of the lunar aspect of that day, of Wednesday. Wednesday's a big day. There's all sorts of stuff happening. The moon's going to be making an opposition to Mars. So there's a severing quality that's happening here where we may be, moving forward with our life, and we're coming into conflict with our desire for nurturing, our desire for kind of a maternal womb-like experience, coming in contact with Mars in a very cold, severe sign of Capricorn, where, this Mars does not have any patience for your feelings. So there may be a little bit of a quality where we want some support, but Mars is not really there for that on this day. The last thing that happens, and this is kind of exciting, is that Venus will be moving into Taurus. Okay. And this happens around 10 o'clock at night. There we go. It says 11, but happens a little earlier than that. So here you go. You see Venus now in the first decan of Taurus, almost immediately making a conjunction with Uranus. It's going to become in kalesis or adherence with Uranus as we move into Thursday. So we may get the inklings of it, but it's going to start to intensify as the week goes on, the need to do something in a new way. So let's talk about Venus and Taurus a little bit here. Okay, so Venus and Taurus, first of all, we get a ton of dignity. We get a ton of dignity, right? Venus is in its own domicile. Taurus is the sign that is ruled by Venus. So she is the general manager of this estate. Okay, she's very comfortable here. She's being provided for by all of her own resources of patience, of fertility. Austin Coppock calls this the plow, and he talks about fertile fields that are waiting to be planted. So part of the work that is done with Venus in the first decan of Taurus is we need to plan for how we're going to plant our new seeds. So there will be a new seed that's planted with this Uranian Promethean energy here, but this is all about kind of making a decisive plan for, like, you can compare this time to like the beginning of spring, where you're saying, okay, I've got a garden, and I've got to go break up the soil so that the sun's vitality can shine down on it, and heat up all the microorganisms that will create the fertility within the soil. And then I have to choose what seeds I'm going to plant. I have to literally go into my seed bank and go to the store or whatever, and buy these packets and decide what crops I'm going to plant for the year. And maybe I'm starting little seeds indoors and they're very vulnerable, but I have to, it's a planning phase. So this is a good planning position for Venus, for bringing fertility to light. It is the domicile ruler, that it has triplicity rulership. Venus is the triplicity ruler of the earth signs in the day. So there's communal support. She's on her own terms, so she can do whatever she wants. She doesn't have to answer to anybody. I mean, this is Venus at one of her purest expressions. This is also the moon's degree of exaltation, right around 3 degrees, right where Uranus is. So this is the moon was a manifester. So this is a really powerful, powerful moment of manifestation that we're talking about, okay? The card associated with this decan is the 5 of Pentacles. You can see this in the video. And here we see 2 figures outside of a church or outside of a stained glass window who have some sort of injury or illness, or they're kind of destitute. They've fallen on hard times. And from what I've done in my research, it's not necessarily true that you will fall on hard times if you have planets in this decan. It just means that there is a fear of that, and that is what is propelling you towards the action of planting the seeds. So a lot of the times what really compels us to work the land is hunger and fear of being hungry and fear of going without. And I think that energy is very powerful in this decan. Book T calls it material trouble. The book of Thoth calls it worry. So we may be very worried that we are not going to have enough. And that may have come to light with this Venus-Pluto, Venus-Saturn square. I mean, I really think that a lot of times what Venus and Saturn in square is going to say is, hey, you know what? You may not have the resources that you thought you did. And you're going to have to do something very different if you want to keep continuing on with whatever lifestyle that you have, or if you want to support yourself. This has been true in my own life too. Like, I've been going through some changes with my career and doing astrology more than I've been doing some of my musical endeavors. And, it requires a whole new mode of doing things and a new way of new ideas to try to support yourself. And I've talked about this on the podcast too. Like, I have our house basically was sold a year ago, and new owners, and with new owners and a more expensive mortgage, the rent goes up. So we have to find new ways to pay the rent, basically. And you can feel the pinch of that sometimes. But the key is not getting stuck in the old way of doing something. Your life is going to be constantly shifting. And instead of getting too bent out of shape about yearning for, quote unquote, a simpler time, which, may not have been simpler. There are simpler, there are calmer parts of the river in the story of your life, or in the journey of your life. But it's unavoidable to come to some of the rapids, and you've got to learn how to steer through those rapids with grace, and to figure out what is required of you. And I think that that's the key to being a human being and this is the key to having a spiritual life, but that is rooted in practical acceptance too, is there will be times where, and my teacher likes to describe this with the battle of Arjuna in his bhakti yoga practice, and I agree with him on this. There'll be times where there's things that you don't want to do, but if you don't do it, you're in trouble. That's your dharma. That's whatever you're tasked with doing, and that's just part of your story. And I think that the suffering comes is when we do not accept those divine assignments to deal with the difficult parts of our life. And we tend to resist. As human beings, we don't like change. We want to do things, we want security, and we want to do things the way we've always done them, because it's easier. You know, it's the path of least resistance. As human beings, we're especially in convenience culture that we have in this modern society, we we get attached to those things, and when we lose things that we thought we were entitled to, that can be painful. But it's just part of the flow of life. It's just part of the flow of nature. And if we just see beauty in those cycles and accept that we're not always going to be on top of the wheel of fortune, that's when we reduce our suffering rather than our. We're not always going to be able to reduce the pain, but we reduce the suffering by not resisting the flow of our life. Okay, so Venus, I mentioned earlier, Venus allows herself to be adorned. The story of Venus is she emerged from the ocean as this beautiful phosphorescent jellyfish. She was glowing this beautiful blue light, and she was glowing so brightly that all these little cherubs like adorned her with clothing and jewelry and gifts. And she didn't have to do anything else but just be her beautiful self and radiate her essence. And I think that Venus is just allowing good things to come to her. Doesn't mean we shouldn't plant the seeds. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't prepare the land. But once we do that, once we plow, once we plant the seeds, you can only water so much in one day. You can only fertilize so much. If you try to overdo it, try to do too many things at a time, this is where the quality of patience comes in. And as a gardener myself, you overwater something that creates corruption, that creates rot. So it's both the actions that we can take and then the patience to allow the process to unfold. I think that's where we're going to see the greatest gifts of Venus in Taurus, particularly the first decan. So nurture your seeds appropriately. All right, prepare the land, figure out what's going to be planted, and then be willing to allow the magic of its unfolding with patience. All right, let's move forward. If we think of Venus as a catharsis too, I think this would be a great time just to go get your hands dirty. How cathartic is it to like dig in the dirt and like, I mean, they've shown that there's research that shows like there's little microbes that help fight depression in the soil. So my recommendation, if you're feeling down, is like, just go get your hands dirty, go take a walk out in nature. You start to build something, and that can really give you a nice sense of release and release some of the really like the challenging feelings that we may have that may be coming from a fear of lack. All right, so let's move forward to Thursday. We have less things as we go along, so we're heading rounding towards the end here. Thank you for sticking it out with me. I've gotten a lot of feedback that people like my deep dives into astrology here. It's a good thing because I don't think I can not be long-winded. So thanks you for your appreciation with that. And, and if it's not your thing, there's plenty of other astrologers out there that'll give you the 10-minute version, and that's okay. I won't be offended if that's where you get your information. Okay, Thursday, the first quarter moon is going to be waxing into the gibbous phase. And what this means is that we've moved past the 45-degree square, and we're heading 45 degrees beyond that to about 135 degrees. This is in the eightfold system, and it's probably not exact. I mean, I think that this is kind of thing where, you have a quality where the lines are a little bit blurred here. I think the big thing with this is that we have a sextile between the moon and the sun. So whenever we have this gibbous phase, we've gone through some of the conflicts of the first quarter, and now we've been shown the what doesn't work about our plan. And we have a phase of refining, and this is where we maybe have some support, because there is the nature of Venus inherent in the sextile based on the position of Venus to the lights in the Thema Mundi. So this may be a time where we're getting support for our dreams. We've figured out, we've made a choice at the first quarter moon, and now we're mobilizing these resources for the unflowering of our vision, or the unfolding of the vision. Other aspects that we'll be seeing during Thursday is we've got that, of course, we've got that, actually, man, Venus, no, Mercury, damn you, Mercury. Mercury tried to get me again. So let me just let me just rewind. Move forward again. Okay. So retrograde. Stupid brain. This is actually a trine. So it's not a sextile. This is a trine between the moon and the sun, which is of the nature of Jupiter, right? So instead of just having this Venusian support, we have this Jupiterian communal support, which I think is still a positive, beneficial aspect. So a lot of the same things apply, but this may be a time where we're having some expansion. We're figuring out what the moral implications of our dream are, with being ruled by Jupiter and things like that. That happens at 2:49 a.m. And yes, this is a point of ease, though. This is where we've moved beyond some of the challenges of the first quarter square. Okay, make sense? Good. Sorry about that. Mercury always tries to get me in these retrograde phases. I had I've had many of those moments where the wires get crossed in my brain as I'm kind of doing this stream of consciousness with some notes, but mostly it's off the cuff here, and you got to be careful because Mercury wants to get you. It's blending all the details together. Okay. So the next aspect that we have is a trine between the moon and Neptune at 8:14 p.m. So this is another thing where the dream and the manifestation of the dream, the membrane is of the moon, is allowing some Neptunian light to come through, right? Where it could be both a moment of transcendence, a moment of divine merging, a moment of feeling connection with our sense of purpose and spirit, or it could be a time where we're just having a nice respite, a nice break from everything, and a little bit of a positive escapist, tendency as well. As we move through the morning, the moon will make an opposition to Jupiter at 20 degrees of Cancer and Capricorn, and then it will oppose Pluto in the evening at 6:50. The other thing that we're going to be seeing is just the beginning of a kalesis. Kalesis is a term that means like a bonding or a merging together of energies. And we're going to be seeing this bonding of Venus and Uranus. So we're going to be, or Uranus, I like saying it like that, where we're going to be really starting to feel a desire, Venus, to do something new, like to plant that new seed. We're going to be picking up momentum towards the shattering of the old way of doing something that is going to help us to manifest abundance in a very earthy and practical way. So that's something that we'll be seeing probably around 6 p.m. as we see the opposition between the moon and Pluto start to manifest. And this could be another moment of challenge, because oppositions were of the nature of Saturn, where we're trying to bring the vision into manifestation, but we may run into a roadblock. We may run into our own fears. I mean, this is another thing with Saturn, is running into our own doubts, fears. Remember, it was like the liar. So we may have a voice in our head that is trying to steer us off course, or it also could be just coming to terms with the limitations and paring it down a little bit further, so that our dream is really able to manifest physically. All right, let's move up forward to Friday. Remember, we're building towards our full moon. So this is just, the energy is really building over the course of this week. This is a great time for bringing things into being with a waxing moon. Okay. Whereas its opposite, the waning moon, is for distributing things or for releasing things. Okay, let's see. Friday, the 6th, moon's going to move into Leo at 4:27 a.m. We're in our gibbous phase, waxing to full, where we're refining the expression of the seed that we planted at the Pisces new moon at 4 degrees Pisces, which I've learned was conjunct the fixed star Fomalhaut. I believe I'm saying that correctly, but it could be not. Which was, according to Austin Kopic's lecture, the wizard poet fixed star, which I thought was kind of neat. Very, very very magical, very poetic, very concerned with beautifying everything. It was one of the royal, one of the four royal stars, and it was kind of bringing recognition through beauty and being sort of like a magician of your life. So that's what we're trying to do with this new moon conjunct Fomalhaut is channel that star's energy through the sun and the moon, through our vitality and through our ability to bring that energy into manifestation. You know, Fomalhaut is feeding this new moon cycle very powerfully. So anytime we're trying to be more poetic or bring a little magic into our life, that could be part of the themes that we're going through here. So we are going to see a opposition very early in the day to Saturn at 2:11 a.m. before it moves into Leo. Then the moon moves into Leo. In the morning, once the moon is in Leo, it's going to square Uranus, okay, and Venus. So first it squares Venus and then it squares Uranus. So a challenge, another challenge to this new gardening plan that you may have. I could see this as, running into, you're plowing the fields and you hit a big rock, or you hit some roots that really just require some extra effort to get out. And there's always those moments when you're trying to garden where you have to just put in some hard work to get rid of the junk in there so that the field is really like able to support the growth that you want it to support. And sometimes we have to get rid of the obstacles. We have to get rid of the junk in there. And it's laborious. So that might be something that we're experiencing on Friday with the square to Venus and Uranus with that waxing gibbous phase. And it could be due to like some identity issues too, some pride issues with the moon in Leo in the first decan of Leo. This could also be a challenge trying to get some attention. The first decan was associated with the Five of Wands, and in that particular decan, there's some competition. We see four or five figures like battling for position, battling for the spotlight, so to speak. So this may be a moment where you are really trying to mobilize your audience, where you have a sense of competition, and that may be something that you have to work through with that moon square to Venus and Uranus. On Saturday the 3rd, there are no exact aspects, which I think is kind of interesting. I mean, the biggest thing that we're going to be really experiencing that day is just a continuance of what we were experiencing on Friday, and just a build towards an intensification of this energy of Venus and Uranus and the sun and Neptune. Those are the two really big things that we're building towards this week, is those two conjunctions, which happen simultaneously on the same day, on Sunday. So let's move forward to that day. All right, so on Sunday, first aspect of the day is the moon making an opposition with Mercury retrograde very early in the day. So maybe that happens when we're sleeping, or we feel this building throughout Saturday, is this opposition to a retrograde Mercury. And the third decan of Leo is about defending your turf. That was the Mars ruled decan, with the figure like on the top of the hill, defending their right to be who they are and their authority. So there may be some conflict between you and potentially some sort of group consciousness that happens with Mercury retrograding through Aquarius. So there may be a question on Saturday of what you are going to take with you and what you're going to leave behind, what is worth defending and what you need to let go of. That could be part of that opposition with the moon and Mercury retrograde. So just be careful in your communications that you don't get, up on your high horse, so to speak. That all is going to shift as the moon moves into Virgo right here. Moon moves into Virgo at about 6:47 a.m. So Sunday is probably going to be more of a Virgo moon type of day, where all the kind of blustery pride issues of Saturday are going to be about getting down to business now with the moon moving into Virgo and paying attention to the details. Early in the day at 8:23 a.m., one of our big aspects of the week, this is the Sun Neptune conjunction. Okay. And this is emerging of their energies. Now, I'm a little bit, I'm curious if this is similar to the cazimi of the traditional planets. Now, I say I'm curious because, I mean, it's the same aspect. It's the same, Neptune being in the heart of the sun, but I'm not exactly sure if this works the same way for outer planets. And I don't know, Neptune's not even visible. So, I mean, that it's very hard to see it. I guess it pops up every once in a while, if I'm not mistaken, but they didn't discover these planets till very much later because they're almost invisible to the naked eye. So I'm curious if that same concept exists. The other thing is that generally, a lot of Hellenistic or traditional astrologers like to think of these outer planets sort of like fixed stars, where they're feeding the energy of the planets. Like Austin was saying, like they were a root system, or they were like the parent plant, and the planets were like root systems. So I kind of almost think, and this is just conjecture on my part, but I almost think that Neptune is feeding the vitality of the sun rather than vice versa in this case. And I could be wrong on this, but this is a guess that I have, where our sense of purpose is being fed by the Neptunian root, like parent plant, with giving us a vision, giving us a transcendent merging with the divine. Some of the notes I wrote down. And this is happening in the second decan of Pisces. So this is everything that we've talked about with the 9 of Cups. It's true here, where we're being a bridge between spirituality and physical reality. That it was a Jupiter-ruled decan, so Jupiter is a bridge type of experience. Imagine this was like Neo in the Matrix, where he is awoken from his reality, from his falsehood, and now he's getting trained in kung fu, and he's returning with some sort of elixir of life. If we are extrapolating that out into the hero's journey, he leaves the ordinary world. He goes to the special world, learns some new skills, goes into the belly of the whale, and then returns to the ordinary world with some sort of gift, right? And this may be a moment where we're motivated to return with some sort of awareness that we've experienced over this last cycle. Okay, so some of the notes I wrote down, some of the positives: illuminating the sun, the vision, Neptune, right? The torch within the labyrinth of the mind. Remember, the first decan of Pisces was called the labyrinth. You can think of this, one image that came to my mind was Jonah in the belly of the whale, but he's got a torch in there and he can see, what's going on. But it more so not like he's trapped. I would say that this is almost an escape from the belly of the whale using the torch. Enhanced imagination and inspiration, a sense of a higher purpose, divine guidance. In the negative, this could be a moment of self-deception or escapism, a dissolving of the self or the ego, an urge to merge with the divine. That doesn't necessarily have to be bad. A dissolving of the ego can be good, as I've talked about earlier in this video / podcast. I think that the mistake, the danger is mistaking addiction for spirituality. And I talked about this earlier with the substance abuse challenges, is we can mistake that kind of escapism that we may experience through drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, that whatever vice that you have or whatever toxin of choice you have, for merging with the divine. And I really think that the challenge is that when you wake up, reality could be harsher. I mean, I know that some will argue with me that, people who have done like psychedelics and stuff are like, well, I finally awoken to the true nature of reality and things like that. And I don't know if I don't necessarily disagree with that, since haven't really gone down that path myself. I'm not someone who has done psychedelics in my life. I just know that I think for me, I'm so sensitive that I may like go down the rabbit hole and it'd be hard for me to come back. So I can't speak to that with an authority. So I'll just, plead my ignorance and plead the fifth on that one. But I think that there are definitely times in life where we are trying to escape from things and it becomes something that is unhealthy. So just be careful of that. Be careful of hubris too. I think that this is ruled by Jupiter in in Capricorn. This whole conjunction is kind of searching for resources in this fallen Jupiter in Capricorn, right? And this could be where we're just really hungry for power. And we think that it's divinely inspired, but at the root of all of it is just this fear that we don't have authority in our life, right? And we're just making a blind power grab like Darth Vader. Everybody thinks that they're the hero of their own story. And even the people who have manifested the most evil on the planet believe that they are, manifesting some higher purpose. I've been listening to some lectures on zodiacal releasing about, and I guess Adolf Hitler was used as an example, and even that guy. I mean, what I found interesting about his story is that he was a failed artist. He was searching for catharsis through his art, and he failed. He was not allowed to do that. His dad disapproved of it, and I guess, I don't know if he flunked out of like art school or something, and he ended up joining the military, and through his fear of lack, he started blaming one certain group of people, and got really blinded by his ambition, and wreaked really enormous havoc on the earth. Like I think we can all agree that he was one of the most destructive people to ever live. And it came from this place of fear. It came from this place of having some idealized vision where he really did think he was the hero of his own story. And he was so charismatic. He had Saturn in Leo, histrionics. Remember, this is the actor. He had an exiled Saturn, and he was able to use his fear to really be very charismatic and to create a following and to tap into other people's fear. Sound familiar? This is something we are experiencing now with some of our leadership around the world right now, as people are tapping into our greatest fears, and it's very charismatic. It's very seductive, and we just have to be careful of that. We have to be careful that we're not thinking that we're trying to be the hero, but actually, doing something that could be very destructive. And I think that's the danger with Jupiter and Capricorn right here. Okay. Feeding this vision, especially with its conjunction with Pluto. Okay. So that's our conjunction of the sun with Neptune. On the plus side, we could really be drawing some vitality from our spiritual depths. We are tasked with reconciling the vision with the manifestation of that vision, and getting clarity of purpose. All right. The other thing that's happening almost simultaneously on the same day, only a few short hours later, is a conjunction between Venus and Uranus. Okay, that happens around 3:30 or so in the afternoon, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Okay, and man, these are really it's not very often that you see two inner planets conjoining with two outer planets simultaneously on the same day. I mean, to me, that is a very powerful omen that is speaking, and it is being sextiled by all the Capricorn stuff to the Piscean stuff, and it's trining everything by whole sign to the Capricorn stuff as well. So there's some positive. There's really not a ton of negative testimonies that are happening, and we have this Virgo moon, which is also trining everything. So to me, this is an extraordinarily powerful moment or day of manifestation and of seed planting. This is something where it kind of a lot of it's all systems go. The only thing that's really stopping us right now is this retrograde Mercury, and it may just be a little confusing, and some of the communications may not go as quickly as we want, but This is a very powerful seed moment. I want you to mark this on your calendar, March 8th, 2020. And I want you to look back on this day and see what was started on this day, because we're going to be dealing with the fallout or the gifts or I could say the repercussions or the manifestations of this for a long period of time. Okay. So really pay attention. This Venus Uranus conjunction, my notes say an awakening. This is where I was talking about returning with the elixir from the hero's journey again. Relationship breakthroughs via using resources in a new way. Rebirth of love and friendship. Lucrative new material idea. Ren Butler talks about bright colors and peacock feathers with Venus and Uranus. This could be where you do something in a very bold way to create some new start. Neon, rainbows, vibrancy, sensuality. The vision meets the manifestation energy. The beautiful new divinely inspired seed is planted. So, yes, we've been building this is one of the moments we've been building to. We're always building towards something and releasing something, but I think this is one day that we're going to look back on and say, wow, March 8th, 2020, manifest. Okay. All right. I think that's what I've got for this week. Let me know in the comments what kind of things you are thinking of manifesting and how this energy plays out for you. I'd be really curious to hear your stories and how they're playing out. And if you have any Venus, Pluto, Venus, Saturn stories too, those are cool too. And maybe we can work through it. Looking ahead to next week, the 9th through the 15th, we have the 9th through the 15th. We're going to have a full moon on Monday, the 9th, at 19 degrees of Virgo, which is going to be opposite Neptune and trining Jupiter. So very powerful moment for bringing the dream into practical reality, and paying attention to the details of the vision, figuring out what needs to stay and what needs to go. Those are some of the things we're going to experience. On the same day, Mercury is going to be stationing direct at 28 degrees of Aquarius. So during this really powerful Sunday manifestation day, Mercury is going to be slowing way down, coming to a halt, and then going direct the next day. So another very powerful moment in the mercurial cycle. On Wednesday, the 11th, Sun's going to be sextiling Jupiter. So some wind in our sails next Wednesday. And then on Sunday, the 14th, Mars is going to sextile Neptune, and the Sun is sextiling Pluto. So really some positive aspects after the heavy lifting that we do this week, right? So we may be really starting to get some new positive momentum that's happening as we move towards our spring equinox and the beginning of spring, where it's really going to hit overdrive, I think. Okay, that's what I've got for this week. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoy these videos and this podcast, make sure you hit your like and subscribe button on whatever platform you are. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts now. Leaving a review, hitting those 5 stars is always helpful as well. Sharing with your friends. If you want to leave a tip, I do have a Venmo link and a PayPal Me link. Again, the best thing that you can do if you want to support the work that I do is to schedule a reading with me. It's always fun to get to meet with all of you and to see how your lives are going and how the podcast has what you've been learning from it and things like that. That's always fun for me. So really appreciate getting to know all of the listeners and whatnot. So reach out, spencermichaudastrology@gmail.com if you want to set something up. We do things through Zoom, video conferencing. It's a lot of fun. All right, everyone. That's what I've got for this week. Have a good week, and we'll see you the next time. Take care. Peace.